Yes. So once again, thank you very much to everybody for joining us into this Chosŏn History Society event. We have today a very interesting talk presented by Chun Jihoon, PhD candidate at Ruhr-Universität Bochum. He is a PhD candidate at the area program, which is a rural doctoral program on transnational institution building and transnational identities in East Asia. He is currently working on a dissertation project titled Cherishing the Small, Serving the Great, Collapse upon Public Law of All Nations, Ching-Chosŏn Union of Upper State and Subject State during 1882-1895. Thank you very much, Chun Jihoon, for accepting to take part in these lectures and for presenting the topic. Briefly, I will just mention a couple of things. The topic of today is late 19th century Ching-Chosŏn Union of Upper State and Subject State, in which he will be presenting how sources show of these political ideas and how they connected the relationship between the Qing Empire and the Chosŏn dynasty. But because today Jihoon is the protagonist, I give you the word. Thank you very much for taking part of your time to be with us. Please, the floor is yours.
So should I start?
Please.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for having me here to give this talk in Chosŏn History Society. Well, today's talk is a partial overview of my dissertation titled Late 19th Century Ching-Chosŏn Union of Upper State and Subject State, 상국 속방 체제, Upper State, 상국, Subject State, 속방. So here I put up these three images. On your left side, it's the national flag. The caption says 대청국 속 고려 국기. So it's the national flag of the state of Goryeo that belonged to the Great Qing, Taechung. Well, I said belonged to for the character sok, but the deep historical significance of this character sok is one main theme of my research in today's talk as well. And on the upper right side, you see this wall print from the British Library. It says 회복 조선 특승 첩도. So here we see Joseon. On the left side, this is the national flag of Goryeo, and we have Joseon here. So so one question here is, did both Goryeo and Joseon exist at the same time? At the bottom, you see about the center, we see the ultimate supreme 태극 with 음양 sign surrounded by the 8 trigrams. And above it, we see the dragon flag. So if the dragon flag symbolized the Qing state, then the ultimate supreme, the 태극 with 음양 sign and the 8 trigrams, it might be Goryeo or Joseon. Or if it was something else, then what should it be? That's one of the questions I want to ask here. As an opener about the Goryeo and Joseon, let's look at some more war prints from the British Library here. In the marked blue, it says 고려 장군 and 고려 의병. So again, we see here Goryeo. And by the way, this picture is done by 숭산 도인. On the upper left side, it says that. And in this one, we also see the supreme ultimate 태극 with 8 trigrams in different format here at the center marked in red. And on the upper right side, we see the flags with 섭. The character 섭 signifies one of the commanders of Qing army that landed on Asan. to quell the Tonghak Rebellion, and afterward to fight the Japanese army in the Qing-Japanese War. And the reason I put this flag by sub is because I use one quote of Seopsaseong in the second last slide today. And in this one, it also says 조선 수전 득승 첩도. But overall, in this war prints in the British Library, there are more frequent references of Joseon, than of Korea than of Joseon. And also in this picture, which depicts the peace negotiation of the Qing-Japanese War in 1895, the envoy from Joseon is marked as 고려 흠차. On the right side, we see, including Li Hongjang, the envoy from Russia, an envoy from Belgium, and 고려 흠차. On the left side, we see Ito Hirobumi, along with representatives from Britain, France, Germany, and the United States. As another opener, I want to ask this question. Why was Joseon people designated as Minin and Minbu, while almost all other peoples in the Hwangcheong Jikgongdo, 1761, the imperial Qing illustrations of tributary peoples, almost all other peoples in this illustration were marked as Iin, Ibu. So what's the significance of Minin and Minbu? Well, if we consider that the meaning of character E could be construed as something like foreigner or foreign people, then that means Minin or Minbu were not foreign to the Qing government, the Qing imperial polity. So in one sense, the Joseon people and the Joseon state were regarded by the Qing imperial court as not outsider, insider. So it was kind of within, without. So these polities were all designated as tributary peoples, but Joseon was so very unique compared to almost all other peoples. So the envoy from Joseon was at the very front line among all other tributary envoys in this picture, 만국 레저도, 1761. So the relationship between 상국, 속방, Qing-Joseon, 상속 relations were not just hierarchical, but based in East Asian, I would say, celestial empire central order, marked by Cheonjo. And this is a suggestion, suggestion that the Ta-Qing government banknote says that the Ta-Qing government, the Great Qing government, was marked as TACHING, not QAQING, which I see as a kind of symbol manipulation. So if these Ta-Qing government banknotes stored in the British Museum were genuine ones, then this could be a justification to turn back to CHING instead of using QING for referring to the Qing. Now, this is an introduction for today's talk. As background, we'll discuss about late 19th century semi-sovereign polities in the West and in the East. The semi-sovereign polities exist both in the West and the East in the late 19th century. Secondly, I'm going to talk about 속방 and 자주. And 속방 was not contradictory to 자주, but they were complementary. So what does or did 속방 mean? And what became of Joseon's 자주 at the time? And then 삼국 속방 relations as the Qing-Joseon Union, which was based on Gunshin relations, will be considered. And for implications, I would argue that Qing-Joseon Union was something of an East Asian federal or confederal transcendental protectorate, which was refurbished Confucian imperial formation that could be construed, that could be delineated as Hwangcheong Joseon, mentioned by Lee Jung-ha. So this is quote by Yu Gil-jun 중립론 on neutrality. And Yu Gil-chun in 1885 in this piece said that geopolitically, our polity, Chosun, is located in the most strategic area in Asia, just like Belgium in Europe. And relationally, Chosun is to the central government, Chunguk, as its tributary, is what Bulgaria is to the Ottoman Porte. But not like Bulgaria, our polity has the rights to make treaty relations with other states on an equal footing. On the other hand, unlike Belgium, our polity is in a position to pay tributes to and receive investiture by the central government. So our polity's status, Chosun status, possesses both characteristics of Belgium and Bulgaria. So what does it mean by possessing both characteristics of Belgium and Bulgaria? So here in the map, in the center, about the center, we see the Bulgaria surrounded by the Ottoman Empire, Serbia, and Romania. So Article 1 of Treaty of Berlin, 1878, said that Bulgaria is constituted an autonomous and tributary principality under the suzerainty of Ottoman Sultan. And on the right side, this is the translation of this Treaty of Berlin prepared by Hayeojang, the then Qing minister to Japan. It says here, 자주지국 속 박로아리아, Bulgaria, 위 자주지국 속제 부용후작 귀 토제 통할치. So here, the word autonomous is rendered by 자주 or 자주지국, and the term tributary principality, tributary, is rendered by 부용후작, and the term suzerainty by 통할. So the term 자주 does not mean, at least for the Qing elite in the late 1870s and through 1880s and 1890s, all through the period I'm looking at, the Qing elite, not just Hayeojang, but including the ministers at the Chongliamen, including Li Hongzhang, they all recognize the term, the concept 자주 as autonomous right, autonomous sovereign rights, autonomy, but not full autonomy, which was qualified by a higher authority, higher imperial authority, in this case, by Ottoman Porte's imperial authority. And for the Qing-Joseon relationship, the Qing imperial authority was higher than the qualified autonomy of Joseon kings. And the term 부용후작, well, it could be understood in several ways, but the English term tributary is not that fixed, and it does not have clear juridical precision. And we'll see the ambivalence between the tributary vassal states and semi-sovereign states. And here the word 통할, well, it could be translated something like bringing them in legal jurisdiction, bringing them under our jurisdiction. And that should be the meaning of the Qing authority over Joseon, which was recognized by the Qing elites at that time. So the meaning of 속방, well, the image here is the draft of the 속방 조회, subject state memorandum. And for the background of this subject state memorandum, in 1876, the longtime leader of Chongliamen, Prince Kung, he said that the essence of subject state, so in other words, the responsibility of Joseon state as Qing subject state is tributary obligations, the courteous observation of tributary obligations, and accepting the Qing imperial investiture. So here it says 봉아 정삭, but it literally would mean accepting the Qing imperial calendar with regional titles, but it's a representation of the authority of Qing imperial authority represented by the practice of investiture. On the other hand, the essence of cherishing subject state, in other words, the responsibility of Qing state treating the Joseon state, would be removing difficulties, 서기난, solving problems, 해기분, and guaranteeing Joseon security, 희기안전. So what's noteworthy here is the essence of subject state, the responsibility of the Joseon state as subject state, is relatively clearly delineated. But the responsibility of the Qing state towards Joseon is quite in general terms, much more in general terms. So this is one of the characteristics of East Asian, or at least Ching-Chosŏn political narratives. Well, while Western observers might denounce these kinds of narratives as lacking legal precision, but this is the very characteristic of East Asian political narratives. But it does not mean any arbitrary control. They were based on negotiations, asymmetric negotiations, so that both polities would benefit from each other's presence in the interdependency of each other. And this is the image of the treaty text between the Joseon and United States in 1882. And here I marked the character 즉 중국 광서 on the right side in red. 즉 중국 광서, it represents, so it literally means year 8 of the central government, 광서. So this represents the meaning of 속방. While 대조선 개국 491년, 491 since the founding year of the Joseon dynasty, this would represent 자주. But 자주 here again is not full sovereignty or full autonomy. It's rather partial or semi-sovereignty. And the meaning of this 속방 자주 should be understood in terms of the Western legal treatises. Let's look at these articles here. So according to Henry Wheaton, Elements of International Law, it says states which are dependent on other states in respect to the exercise of certain rights essential to the perfect external sovereignty have been termed semi-sovereign states. So here, semi-sovereign states are rendered by 반주지국, and 반주지국, these semi-sovereign states do not have full sovereignty. 불능전연자주. So this description befits Joseon status vis-a-vis the Qing. And according to Bluntschli, they say the semi-sovereign states, for example, vassal states and states belonging to a confederation and states subject to protectorate, they must always give precedence to the states on which they are dependent. In other words, suzerain states or protectors. And in the same way, the precedence belongs to central power in its relations with the states of which the union is composed. So there are, according to Bluntschli, there could be 3 categories of semi-sovereign states: vassal states, and states under protectorate, and states belonging to a confederation. So here one question would be, to what category should Joseon belong? But I'll leave this question as an open question until the last slide. Now, the Ching-Chosŏn Union was based on sovereign subject relations, 군신 relations, established in 1637 and developed ever since. So 군신 relations were exemplified by this memorial, this communication by the Qing emperor at that time in 1637. It says that the sovereign subject relations was such that it should be continued for generations and generations to come. And this sovereign subject relations was based on completed conquest of the Qing forces of the Joseon state. And this relationship evolved over time to be expanded and systemized. So the great Qing emperors, Taechong emperors, they were overlord, while Joseon kings were lord, with qualified autonomy that accepted the Qing imperial authority. So this quote is also noteworthy. This is by Yun-jung, one high official at that time. He said that autonomy befits Chosun, but not independence, because the great Qing is around. And the Chosun polity, Chosun, we should be faithful to the obligations to the Qing state as a lord. So the notion of overlord and lord was not just among Qing elites themselves, but it was shared by at least some portion of Chosun elites as well. Of course, some other portion of Chosun elites, which were so-called Enlightenment Party, Kaehwadang, they did not buy this notion. And Ching-Chosŏn union of upper state and subject state, 상국 속방, it can be shown by the meaning of the term 상국 and 속방 in one sense. So 상국, in terms of Witten, Woolsey, and Bluntschli, were corresponded to federal government or confederation, central government, general government, or the emperor and the empire itself. And according to Bluntschli, 상국 corresponded to suzerain state, protector state, or central power. So the concept 상국 was so versatile here. So we need to contextualize the meaning which was applied to the Ching-Chosŏn interdependency. But it was not fixed as one, I would say. And according to the article produced by the Qing Emperor in 1882, it says that the Qing government assumed the responsibility in foreign affairs on behalf of the Chosun court. So basically it says that because the Chosun is under Qing protectorate, we should protect not just Chosun court, but foreign nationals in Chosun. And because Japan is in treaty relations with the Qing, the Japanese nationals in Chosun should also be protected by our force. So this is, in essence, means that the Qing government assumed the foreign relations, in larger part, the foreign relations of Chosun, which is one prime feature of the concept of protectorate in terms of Western legal practices. And Ching-Chosŏn interdependency can be viewed in another perspective as well. According to the rights of 주례, it says 범, 방국, 소, 대, 상유, 대국, 비소국, 소국, 사대국, 갑, 유, 속상, 유이. So here it says all states, either big or small, they should be interconnected to each other for mutual support. So larger polities cherish smaller polities, and smaller polities serve greater polities to sustain each other. And this same, almost same idea is also found in Li Hongzhang. In 1897, he said that as a policy to keep Japan in check, we should have Chosun make treaty relations with the West as a policy of attacking poison, figuratively speaking, attacking poison by poison, attacking enemy by enemy. And this similar idea is also voiced in Haiyazhang in 1881. He says, in peacetime, the Qing and Chosun should maintain a joint readiness against all other foreign powers, including Japan. In emergency, the Qing should come to Chosun's rescue, so that the West, we should let foreign powers not recognize Chosun as full sovereign. Rather, we should let foreign powers recognize Chosun as under Qing protection and authority, as semi-sovereign. And it also says here, in emergency, we should, the concept of neutrality should not apply to Ching-Chosŏn interdependency. So the implications. My argument for today's presentation is that the Ching-Chosŏn interdependency that can be denoted by 상속 체제 was an East Asian federal or confederal protectorate where the Chosun state was regarded as having multiple attributes under Qing authority. So one such attribute is constituent state of a federal polity or confederal polity. Here, Haeojang, he said in 1880, the German Confederation may be invoked in support of Ching-Chosŏn case. Well, he says that Chosun is like Chosun in Asia is like Turkey or Ottoman Porte in the Western world in terms of geopolitical significance and location. In terms of 만국공법, the public law of all nations or international law, the German Confederation was such that the constituent states had each rights to make treaties among not just among themselves but with foreign powers. And these practices, these precedents can also be invoked for Ching-Chosŏn Union, for the Chosun state. And Won-seok even developed this idea. And as one aspect of this idea of developing Ching-Chosŏn Union, he says that for financial and economic trade terms, favorable import tax on Chosun goods would help consolidate the system of upper state and subject state. So this term 상속 체제 was used by Lee Hongjang and Won-seok as well. So I found this usage of the term 상속 체제 quite unique and significant because the term 상국 itself has long been used even from the time of Choi Chi-won in 8th centuries and 9th centuries. But the term 상국 속방 체제, 상속 체제, it seems to be coined by Won-seok and Lee Hongjang, as far as I have read so far. And the attribute of this 상속 체제 as a federal union, as a federal protectorate, can be seen in Seopsa-seong's notice here. And Seopsa-seong was, as seen in the previous war print, he was the commander of the Qing force in June and in July 1894 for the quelling of Donghaks and the fighting against Japan. Well, he said the Qing forces would now exercise the power to give or take the life of the Donghak insurgents. And he emphasized many times that this authority and the consideration of the Chosun people should be construed as the central dynasty, 중조, or 성조, or celestial dynasties cherishing subject state, 중조, 중조 애휴 속국, or 중조 체휼 이등 지인. So this means the Qing authority would be such that their authorities wield direct power over chosen subjects, as in a federal polity. Here, the federal political organization or federal political association would have many subcategories, but I would say the Ching-Chosŏn Union was a federacy where such political union would refer to a fundamentally asymmetric relationship between a smaller polity, Chosun state, and a larger polity, Qing state, where the former, the Chosun state, had greater internal autonomy than any segments of the latter. So any segments of the latter means the regions or provinces under direct jurisdiction of the Qing government. So the Chosun state had much greater autonomy compared to the provinces of the Qing state. But still, the Chosun state did not have full participation in the governance of this overall polity, overall federal polity. And any change in this union should be determined by mutual negotiation, although it was asymmetrical in nature. And this would be one other example by Lee Jung-ha, that the Joseon elite as well recognized the Ching-Chosŏn Union as something of a federation, I would say. And the term Hwangcheong-Joseon is such that Ching-Chosŏn Union should be an overarching unifying authority where suzerain vassals relations, protectorate, and federal or confederal union are all combined in one. So I would call this would be a transcendent protectorate named Hwangcheong-Joseon, as by Lee Jung-ha, which was based on Confucian imperial formation. So my provisional answer or my standpoint so far is that the Ching-Chosŏn political union was federal or confederal in nature, such that all these three concepts, suzerain vassal, protectorate, and federal union, were combined, but it was not one of any. It was not confined to anyone. So in that sense, I would say it was transcendent. And furthermore, the Ching-Chosŏn Union was such that it was not capable of defined in terms of Western words or Western law. It was undefinable in Western words and not governable by Western law. And now I would welcome any comment or question. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jihoon, for the presentation. Yeah, I think there is plenty of people who may have questions. Just for the sake of organization, if there is anybody who wants to make a question, write it in the chat so I can keep a log for the questions. So far, if there is anybody who wants to make the first, please go ahead. I don't know if there is anybody. Well, as I understand your presentation, Jihoon, you are looking first of all at the political terms used in the sources by Chinese and Korean scholars and members of the elite, and based on their understanding and the contextual meaning of those terms, you are defending that the relationship between Qing and Joseon, as it was understood by the leading elites, were somehow confederal. But at the same time, there is quite some sizable amount of scholarship which says that Joseon elite were very aware of their difference and degree of autonomy. This is an aspect that I was very surprised with your presentation. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So you mean Joseon elite's perception of different degree of autonomy?
Mostly how Joseon elites at different moments, including the late Joseon dynasty, understood the Joseon dynasty and the kingdom as being different from the empire, hence with their own space for autonomy, and therefore a separate state, if that makes sense. Or maybe I'm just wrong.
Well, if I understood your question correctly, then I would go back to the quote by Oh Yun-jung in 1882. Well, it was a conversation between Oh Yun-jung and Chu Bok, the circuit attendant in Chunjin. So he was directly under the Li Hongzhang's direction. So Yunjung said the status befitting Chosun is autonomy, not independence. Their autonomy, Chaju. He also said Chaju. So we should distinguish the same term Chaju correctly in different contexts. So that Chaju uttered by Yunjung did not mean complete autonomy or complete sovereignty. It meant partial sovereignty or semi-sovereignty, so-called by the Western legal practices. So at least he himself recognized Chosun as semi-sovereign, not fully sovereign. And the term 상속 체제, although it was used by Wonsegae and Li Hongzhang so far, in terms of my reading so far, but the term 속방, of course, was used by the Chosun officials, including Chosun King, repeatedly throughout the period, 1880s and 1890s. So I would say that tells us that this notion of semi-sovereignty, or 속방, I would say, was shared by Ching-Chosŏn elites in larger part, except a small portion of some radical reform-minded or so-called independent radicals. Well, for example, another example, the Yugil-jun, he said in 중립론, he utilized the word 공방. The 공방 is quite, should I go back to the slide?
Sure. Yeah.
So here, in the first line, he says, 이 위 즉 위 중국지 공방. So 공방, this term is I thought it very interesting because this term seems to have been coined by Yugil-jun himself, because this term was not used by any other officials as far as I've seen. So here he used this term 공방 to mean something like tributary polity, tributary state. So he meant by this term that Joseon should be regarded, recognized by the so-called family of nations, all states under international law, including the Qing state itself, as independent state. So here 공방 means, well, a polity that pays tribute to a superior polity, to the Qing state for the Joseon, but it does not affect its sovereignty. It does not affect full sovereignty. So here 공방 means very, I would say it's just theoretical, but not practical or a realistic concept. So, but at the same time, this is meaningful because Yugil-jun, by using this term, showed the ambivalent position of Joseon, where some parts of Joseon elite, including himself, wanted to see Joseon as fully sovereign, but it should not be recognized so by other powers, by the Qing or the British Empire, because the British Empire wanted to keep Joseon under Qing authority, because the British wanted to use the Qing as against Russia, and for that purpose, Joseon should be kept under Qing authority. So realistically, it was not possible, but it was a political orientation in mid-term or longer term. So in that sense, this would show the quite political representation of the semi-sovereignty of Joseon state by Yugil-jun.
Thank you. Georg Larsen, please.
Thank you, Jihoon, for a really interesting presentation and especially for being so transparent about the different sources you're using. I find that to be really, really fascinating. But you tantalized us with a couple of observations at the beginning, and then you didn't really explain. And so I want to ask you to do that a little bit more. The first is you noted that some Chinese sources sometimes use Gaoli for Korea, others use Chaoshan. Do you see a different intended meaning in those different names used for Korea by the Qing sources that you're using? And then similarly, you indicated some significance between the English romanization, CHING versus QING. I see that primarily as just a different romanization system, a different set of rules, but you seem to imply that there's something else going on there. And so I wonder if you could sort of elaborate on that a bit more as well.
Yes. But this is actually, although I said opener, but it's I would say it's very crucial question of its kind, because it's not very obvious as it seems, because I do see, and probably of course you also see that the Joseon dynasty was not always marked as Joseon, but by Goryeo, for example, by Li Hongzhang himself, many times, not just one time. For example, Li Hongzhang's conversation with Mori Arinori in 1876, he said that under the category of 속방 or vassal, in future agreements between Qing and Japan, we Qing state are willing to add Goryeo and Ryukyu and 18 provinces under direct Qing jurisdiction as 속방 or vassal, as an addendum to the Article 1 of 1871 Qing-Japanese Treaty. And also it's evidenced by these wall prints here. And I myself do not have definitive answer as to which names are so-called correct, or these two names have same names, or same meanings, or these two have the exact same referent or not. I'm still not sure actually, but well, I think we should be reminded of the existence of this term Goryoin or Gareisky in some form of Russian. Well, those people called Goryoin, they were dispersed by Stalin and the Russian policy. They were dispersed, as we all know, to Central Asian nations, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and they still recognize themselves as Goryoin, not Joseonin. So I think that should be the one important evidence that people under Li Dynasty Joseon, at least some part of them, a significant part of them, they identified as people of Goryeo, and it's quite puzzling still. And the other question, the notation for the Qing. Well, as far as I've seen in the literature, up until 1970s and up until 1980s even, scholars did use CHING, not QING. And QING is according to the pinyin system of the PLC government. And I saw that mainly the US government, they adopted this pinyin system from the late 1990s. And since then on, this notation QING has been quite in vogue. But if these banknote samples, as I would say, were genuine ones, which was issued by the Qing government themselves, then I would argue that CHING would be more historical, more truthful to the historical evidences. And I would add just one short point as well. Another, I would say, probably the biggest symbol manipulation would be the so-called China, with CH pronounced as chi sound, but CHIN or CHINA or CHINE, it should have been pronounced, I would say, China or China or somewhere between that, as in French or in Japanese or in the Manchu language itself, if I understand correctly. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
Thank you. 6, if you may.
Hi there. Hi, Jihoon. Thank you for the interesting talk. I have, I don't know if these are, what I have is really a question or a comment disguised as a question or a question disguised as a comment, because I'm also thinking through some issues, similar issues, and I really just wanted to hear your take on it. When I listened to your talk, I had a feeling that is this, to what degree would you be willing to call this a constitutional history? As in a history of I guess an unwritten constitution. And I think when you brought up the notion of federalism and some of the comparative examples with the Ottomans in Bulgaria, Belgium, and whatnot, just started to think a little bit actually about the literature, more recent literature on the Holy Roman Empire, and this idea of the unwritten constitution being something that persists without necessarily having these precise definitions. And in the case of the Old Reich, where the emperor fits in, how Austria fits in, how France fits in, everything's negotiated sort of on the fly, right? And every 20, 30 years, there may be a renegotiation, and warfare, ritual, as well as legal cases are part of that process, right? And so this is being folded into a constitutional history, right? And I think, as I know you're wary about applying Western equivalences, but it seems like, to me, what is going on is different groups of people, sometimes with agreement and without agreement, are using terms for particular reasons, and their interests and ideas about what Chosŏn and Qing's relationship is may not always align. And this is, as you say, a process of negotiation. And if that's the case, I wonder if it might not be methodologically more sound to refrain from ontology, from trying to say what something is, what this relationship is, but rather, because I think for the political actors, what it is an important constitutional question, because that determines what things should be and how they should act and what is legitimate and illegitimate, right? But since these people are all wrangling over these issues, then for us, as looking historically, the issue isn't what it is, but rather how they're negotiating and why they're doing it, and what different terms evoke, right? So I just wanted to hear what your thoughts are on, I guess, the issue of thinking about this as a constitutional history.
So, could you rephrase your question, please?
My question is, to what degree would you think it appropriate to think about the issues you've raised in terms of a constitutional history? And the second question is, methodologically, whether it might be better to refrain from ontology, from trying to figure out what exactly the Ching-Chosŏn relationship is, and instead thinking about it more dynamically as what these actors are trying to do with these terms.
Yeah, about the first question, well, it's a big question, but
Yeah.
if I can answer at least a part of it, hopefully, then I'd like to go back to, yeah, this one, the so-called 속邦조회, subject state memorandum. Well, you said of constitutionalism and whether this Ching-Chosŏn Union could be termed as Western constitutional framework, if I understand correctly. Well, here it says in the fourth and fifth, and in the fifth line there, I'll read it. 기 일절 분내 응행 각절 균여 대영국 호무 간섭. So it says every element of the obligation of Chosun state as Qing subject state should not be interfered with by the British sovereign at all. But the question is, what were the specific elements of the obligation of Chosun state, and in other direction, the obligation of the Qing state toward the Chosun state? Well, it was partly described by Prince Kung, but I'll reiterate one of my arguments that Qing-Chosun relations were not definable by Western words or Western law. So in that sense, Western constitutional framework during the late 19th century or even early 20th century could not be applied to Qing-Chosun case.
But the example I raised was the unwritten constitution of the Holy Roman Empire, right, which is a medieval formation, right? So the idea is that it's not this kind of constitutional, this kind of interaction. It doesn't fit the 19th, 20th century written constitution, right? But maybe, but in recent literature on constitutional history, they're thinking about constitutionalism more broadly in terms of through using, for example, the Holy Roman Empire, or even in the case of the United Kingdom. Anyway, just.
Well, I don't have much knowledge about the Holy Roman Empire. Well, I would add my point about your first question. So yeah, the constituent states of the German Confederation, they had rights to make treaties with foreign states even, while they stayed still under the German Empire. And I thought Hayaojang understood this as a strong support, because it could be applied to the Chosun case. We should let Chosun have trade relations as constituent states of German Confederation, because we could be likened, Qing-Chosun could be likened as a confederation or federation. Well, of course, there should be the distinction between confederation and federation, but I think Qing-Chosun Union had both the characteristics to some degree. Well, confederation in terms of Chosun King's autonomy in loose sense, and federation in terms of the absolute Qing military control of any internal troubles or outside aggression against Chosun. So for that matter, against Qing-Chosun Union. So both aspects, I would say, were there. And for the second question, I would say, yeah, I would totally agree with you. And actually, my two supervisors said the same thing. You should not take these terms and in these presentations, the representations as fixed ontological things, but rather constantly fluid concepts in negotiations. Thank you for your comments, question, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Holly Stevens, did you read?
Yeah, thank you. This was a really interesting talk, and I think there may be a connection between my question and the second question. So, I mean, I wanted to get back to something you mentioned in your comments when you said that, you know, the British were trying to use the Qing to keep Russia in check. And so my question is just, how well do you think other states understood all of this debate over, you know, Korea's semi-sovereign status? Like, do you think that this was more influential within Korean domestic politics, like thinking about, you know, the debates over, you know, within the Korean government? Or do you think that this has implications for Korea's diplomacy with other nations as well? You know, like Japan or the UK or the US. Like, do you have a sense of where the significance of this debate goes in Korean history?
For the British case, the British, they quite explicitly recognized Qing authority by calling it suzerainty, so-called suzerainty. It's the same suzerainty as in the Treaty of Berlin for the Ottoman Porte and Bulgaria case. So for the instance of the occupation of Port Hamilton, Commando, by the British Navy, 1885, 1887. But the British position was that we would recognize Qing suzerainty. So that's why we would want to negotiate with the Qing authorities, not Chosun authorities, even though the Commando belongs to Chosun state. Other states, well, Russia and Japan and Germany, I'm looking at those diplomatic communications now. But so far, I got this impression that those Western states and Japanese perception, or not just diplomats' personal perception, the diplomats in Hanzhong, but their home government's position were in large part represented by the rank of their representatives in Hanzhong. So, for example, the British case again, the representative of Britain was Consul General, 총령사, not minister, not 공사. And the minister in Peking, he was in charge of the Chosun court as well officially, as at the minister level. And the other thing is Russia, the United States, and Japan, they, well, to some degrees and some different natures, but overall they wanted to treat Chosun state as more autonomous, or even nominally fully sovereign states for their own national interests. So Russian and United States and Japanese representatives, they were either ministers or chargé d'affaires or acting ministers, 대리공사. So it was kind of one higher level than just consul general or just consuls. While Germany was represented by consul as well, and in German government, Bismarck, they mostly followed the British line, I would say. It's very interesting question again. Thank you.
We have a question in the chat by Robert Nerf. What do you think about Consul General Weber and the 1886 incident?
I'm not quite sure what this is about. Could you explain further, please, if you can? Oh.
Robert, if you prefer to use the mic, it's also okay. If not, if you write, I can read out loud. Okay. Great. Weber claimed the Russians were trying to make Korea a protectorate. Weber and Yuan supposedly had proof of a secret treaty.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, this one happened in the midst of the occupation of Port Hamilton, but it was not just military Navy occupation. It was so-called part of Great Game between Russia and British governments in their colonial imperial projects in East Asia and Central Asia as well. But here, this is a very good point. I think this is another evidence that the British Empire, they wanted to prop up the Qing authority over Joseon because they thought it would be profitable for themselves to push the Russian advance further by having the Qing authority more asserted in Joseon against Russia, against Japan, but yeah, mostly against Russia here. And this incident, if I remember correctly, is about the attempt to have secret alliance between Joseon and Russian government by the Joseon court seeking the Russian military protection, because at that time the Qing army could not be stationed in Hanzhong because of the convention of Tianjin, Chun-Jihoon of 1885. So one important part of this incident is that the King Gozong, he felt quite insecure, and not just King Gozong, but more importantly, Queen Min and Min faction. They felt so insecure that they wanted to have some military protection from foreign powers other than Qing, because the Qing was confined by the convention of Tianjin of 1885. But of course, it failed because of Yuan Shikai's very smart and quick action to cut it off.
What Robert also had was Yuan and Weber deliberately manufacturing proof, and he adds later that Weber was removed because he was mentally unstable. He was a Chinese linguist, yet still managed to mistranslate the documents and was caught by the Russians, who pointed out the errors.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure about the personal condition of Weber, but yeah, I did see that at least one or two scholars, they argue that the communication sent by Joseon court to the Russian imperial court seeking their military protection was forged by the military, by the British Consul General Barber there at the time. But some other scholars did not mention it, and So it did not seem conclusive as to which was correct or not.
Yeah, Robert Neff adds that it said 140.
I'm not sure whether it's correct that the V enforced it, but if the claim that the Bavard, the British Consul General forged it, is incorrect, then maybe there were some other elements involved here. So probably another factor was 민영익. 민영익, according to Taboashi Kiyoshi, the Japanese scholar, Taboashi Kiyoshi claimed that it seems that 민영익, not Bavard, 민영익 forged or combined two different communications into one, so that it may look like a genuine one produced by the Joseon court, because the forged document had the King Gojong's seal in it. So that might be a probable explanation, I would say. So 민영익 did it, not Wianshkai or Bavard.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question, intervention, comment? No. Then if you shall we finish here the event per se? Thank you, Chun Jihoon. Please don't leave. We can stay here for quite some longer, and also we will announce next events. But once again, Chun Jihoon, thank you very much for this very interesting conversation on a very particularly complex issue. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to spend this afternoon with us.
Again, yeah, thank you all for having me here.
Yeah, so yeah, I will stop here the tape.